Julian Hayes stood at the window of his lakefront penthouse in Chicago, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The view cost him $12 million, but tonight it felt as empty as the rest of his life. At 42, he had everything society told him to want. His real estate company controlled properties worth billions. His name appeared on Forbes lists and business magazine covers. People recognized him at restaurants and airports. Yet here he was, eating microwave takeout alone on a Tuesday night. The apartment around him looked like a furniture showroom. Everything matched perfectly because an expensive interior designer had spent months choosing each piece. The marble counters gleamed. The leather furniture sat untouched most days. The kitchen, state-of-the-art and beautiful, rarely saw anything more complicated than reheated restaurant food or protein shakes. Julian had grown up in a small house in Ohio where his grandmother cooked every meal from scratch. The kitchen always smelled like something wonderful: cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings, pot roast simmering on winter evenings, fresh bread cooling on the counter. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life now. His phone buzzed with another email from his assistant. Tomorrow he needed to fly to a small town 3 hours away to inspect a property his company might acquire. The land sat near a highway exit, perfect for a luxury hotel and shopping complex. The numbers looked good on paper. The profit projections excited his investors. But Julian felt nothing. He had stopped feeling excited about deals years ago. They were just numbers moving from one column to another. The next morning, Julian's driver picked him up at 6. The black luxury sedan cut through Chicago's streets, then onto the highway heading south. Julian tried to focus on the reports his assistant had prepared, but his mind wandered. Out the window, the city gradually gave way to smaller towns, then farmland. Rolling hills covered in late autumn colors stretched in every direction. Red barns dotted the landscape. Horses grazed in pastures. It reminded him of the Ohio countryside from his childhood. Around noon, his stomach started growling. He had skipped breakfast, as usual, grabbing only black coffee before leaving. His driver suggested they stop somewhere for lunch. Julian was about to tell him to find the nearest chain restaurant when he spotted a small building alongside the road. The structure looked weathered but welcoming, painted cream with dark green shutters. A hand-painted wooden sign hung above the door reading Nina's Kitchen, and below in smaller letters, Home Cooking That Feeds Your Soul. Something about that sign made Julian speak without thinking. "Pull over here." His driver looked surprised. Julian never ate at places like this. But he maneuvered the car into the small gravel parking lot. A handful of pickup trucks and older sedans sat parked outside. Through the windows, Julian could see people sitting at tables, talking and laughing. The moment he stepped inside, the smell hit him. It was like walking into his grandmother's kitchen 30 years ago. Fresh baked bread. Something savory and rich simmering. Coffee brewing. Cinnamon and vanilla. His chest tightened with an unexpected wave of emotion. The interior was simple but spotless. Wooden tables and chairs, mismatched but charming. Soft yellow walls decorated with old photographs of the town. A chalkboard listed daily specials in neat handwriting. Local families occupied most tables, their conversations creating a warm buzz of sound. Behind the counter stood a woman arranging fresh pies in a glass display case. She looked up when the door chimed and smiled. Julian felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, not in the polished, magazine cover way of women he usually met, but in a warm, genuine way that reached her eyes. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with rich brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and an apron dusted with flour. Her smile was the kind that made you want to smile back. "Welcome to Nina's Kitchen," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality. "Sit anywhere you like, sweetheart. I will be right with you." Julian chose a table by the window, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his tailored suit and expensive watch. Everyone else wore jeans and work clothes. But nobody stared or whispered. A few people nodded friendly greetings, then went back to their meals. The woman, Nina he assumed, appeared at his table with a glass of water and a menu written in the same neat handwriting as the chalkboard. "First time here?" she asked. "Is it that obvious?" Julian replied. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "We are a small town, honey. I know most faces that come through that door. But you are very welcome. Can I get you some coffee while you decide?" "Please. Black." When she returned with his coffee, she waited patiently while he scanned the menu. Everything sounded incredible. Fried chicken with mashed potatoes and gravy. Homemade meatloaf. Pot roast with vegetables. Chicken and dumplings. Nothing fancy or pretentious. Just real food. "What do you recommend?" he asked. Nina's eyes lit up. "Well, the pot roast is my grandmother's recipe. Been making it the same way for 40 years. Comes with roasted carrots, potatoes, fresh rolls, and a slice of apple pie if you have room. That is what I would choose. Then that is what I will have." While he waited, Julian watched Nina work. She moved through the dining room like a dancer, refilling coffee cups, chatting with customers who clearly adored her, laughing at jokes, remembering names and stories. An elderly man sitting alone got extra attention and a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. A young mother struggling with 2 small children received help cutting up food and patient kindness. Nina treated everyone like family. When his food arrived, Julian just stared at it for a moment. The pot roast sat in rich brown gravy, so tender it fell apart under his fork. The vegetables glistened with butter. The roll steamed when he broke it open. He took his first bite and had to close his eyes. It tasted exactly like comfort, like home, like everything he had been missing without knowing it. Nina stopped by his table. "How is everything?" "This is extraordinary," Julian said honestly. "I have eaten at restaurants all over the world, and nothing has tasted this good." Her smile could have lit the whole room. "That is the sweetest thing anyone has said to me all week. I just cooked the way my grandmother taught me. With love and patience. That is the real secret ingredient." Julian found himself wanting to keep her talking, wanting to know more about her, about this place, about how she managed to create something so genuine in a world that felt increasingly artificial. But other customers needed her attention, so he simply enjoyed his meal in peaceful contentment. The apple pie that followed was perfection. Tart apples balanced with just enough sugar, flaky crust that melted on his tongue, a hint of cinnamon and nutmeg. He ate every crumb. When Nina brought his check, Julian pulled out his wallet and left cash including a tip 3 times the cost of the meal. As he stood to leave, Nina caught his eye. "Thank you for stopping by," she said. "I hope you will come back sometime." Julian smiled. "I think I will." Walking to his car, he glanced back through the window. Nina was laughing with another customer, sunlight streaming through the glass and making her glow. Something had shifted inside him during that meal, something he could not quite name yet. But as his driver pulled back onto the highway, Julian knew with absolute certainty that this would not be his last visit to Nina's kitchen. Julian told himself he was being ridiculous. 3 days had passed since his visit to Nina's kitchen, and he could not stop thinking about it. Not just the food, though that pot roast haunted his dreams, but the whole experience. The warmth, the laughter, the way Nina made everyone feel seen and valued. The way her smile had lingered in his mind like a favorite song. He sat in his office on the 45th floor, staring at contracts that needed his signature. Outside, Chicago bustled with its usual energy. Inside, everything felt gray and lifeless. His assistant knocked and entered with his lunch, another expensive salad from the organic place downstairs. Julian looked at the carefully arranged greens, the precisely measured portions, and felt his stomach turn. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he said suddenly. His assistant blinked. "Sir, you have the investors' presentation at 3. Reschedule it. Something came up. An hour later, Julian was in his car heading south. He did not call ahead. He did not make plans. He just drove, following the same route as before, watching the city fade into countryside. His business partners would think he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. But for the first time in years, he felt truly excited about something. When Nina's kitchen came into view, Julian's heart actually jumped. He parked and sat for a moment, suddenly nervous like a teenager on a first date. Through the window, he could see Nina behind the counter, her hair in a braid today, wearing a different apron covered in cheerful sunflowers. She was talking animatedly with an older woman, both of them laughing. The door chimed as he entered. Nina looked up, and her face registered surprise followed by genuine delight. "Well, look who is back," she said warmly. "The pot roast must have made an impression." "You could say that," Julian replied, sliding into the same seat by the window. This time, when Nina brought him coffee, she lingered a bit longer. "So what brings you back to our little town?" Julian could have lied, could have invented another business meeting, but something about her open, honest face made him tell the truth. "Your cooking. And maybe the company." Nina's smile softened. "Well, that is about the nicest thing I have heard all week. Today's special is homemade chicken and dumplings. My comfort food when the weather turns cold." "Perfect." Over the next 2 hours, between serving other customers, Nina kept returning to his table. They talked about simple things at first. The weather, the town, how long she had owned the diner. But gradually the conversation deepened. Nina told him about inheriting the place from her grandmother 5 years ago, about how scary it had been to leave her office job in the city to run a small-town restaurant. "Everyone thought I was crazy," she said, refilling his coffee cup. "I had a good salary, benefits, a nice apartment. But I was miserable. I would sit in my cubicle dreaming about cooking, about making people happy with food the way my grandmother did. One day I just decided life is too short to be sensible." Julian felt those words settle deep in his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" "Not for a single second," Nina said firmly. "I make less money, sure. My apartment is smaller. But I wake up excited every morning. I know my neighbors. I feed people who become friends. That is worth more than any paycheck." Before he could respond, the door burst open and a young couple rushed in, the woman clearly in distress. "Nina, our car broke down on the highway. My phone is dead, and I am supposed to pick up my kids from school in 20 minutes. Nina sprang into action without hesitation. "Use my phone, honey. Charlie," she called to an older man in the corner, "can you give these folks a ride to the school?" Within minutes, she had orchestrated a solution, sent them off with free coffee and sandwiches for the road, and refused any payment. Julian watched in amazement. This was her world, a place where people took care of each other without expecting anything in return. "You are staring," Nina said with amusement when she returned to his table. "I am just trying to figure you out," Julian admitted. "You give so much to everyone. What do you get back?" Nina considered this seriously. "I get full tables and full hearts. I get to know I made someone's day a little brighter. I get to fall asleep knowing I did something that mattered. What more could anyone want?" Julian had no answer for that. In his world, everything was a transaction. Time was money. Kindness was weakness. But watching Nina move through her diner with such joy and purpose, he began to question everything he had built his life around. As closing time approached, Nina started wiping down tables. Julian stood to leave, but found himself reluctant. "Can I help?" She looked surprised. "You want to help clean? Why not? I am already here." Nina laughed and tossed him a dishcloth. "All right, fancy pants. Let us see if those expensive hands know how to work." Working alongside her felt surprisingly natural. She showed him how she liked the tables wiped, how to stack the chairs just so. They worked in comfortable rhythm, talking and laughing. Nina told him stories about her grandmother, about learning to cook on an old stove that only worked if you kicked it in exactly the right spot. Julian found himself sharing memories he had not thought about in years, about his own grandmother's kitchen in Ohio, about feeling loved and safe in a way money could never buy. "You miss it," Nina observed gently. "That simplicity. I did not realize how much until I walked into this place," Julian confessed. "My life looks perfect from the outside. But it feels empty. Like I am playing a part in someone else's story." Nina stopped cleaning and looked at him directly. "So write a new story. You are not a tree, Julian. You can move." The use of his name surprised him. He had not realized she knew it, though he supposed his credit card had given him away. But hearing her say it felt intimate somehow, like she saw past the expensive suit to the lonely man underneath. "It is not that simple," he started to say. "It absolutely is," Nina interrupted. "People make it complicated because change is scary. But every single day, you choose how to live. You chose to come back here today instead of sitting in some office. That was brave." Julian felt something crack open inside him. "I have been running on autopilot for so long, I forgot I had a choice." "Well, now you remember," Nina said with a gentle smile. "What are you going to do about it?" They finished cleaning in thoughtful silence. When everything was done, Nina walked him to the door. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of purple and gold. "Thank you," Julian said. "For the food, the conversation, the perspective. All of it." "You are welcome anytime," Nina replied. "And I mean that. Not as a customer, but as a friend. If you ever need a reminder of what matters, you know where to find me." Driving back to Chicago, Julian felt different. Lighter somehow, like he had been carrying weight he did not know about and had finally set it down. The city lights appeared on the horizon, but they did not excite him the way they used to. Instead, he found himself already planning his next trip south, already counting the days until he could sit in that sunny diner and talk with the woman who saw him more clearly than anyone had in years. His phone buzzed with urgent messages from his office. Problems that needed solving, decisions that needed making, money that needed earning. Julian glanced at them, then set the phone aside. For once, all of that could wait. He had more important things to think about, like how a small-town chef with flour on her apron had managed to show him what true wealth actually looked like. The visits became regular after that. Once a week at first, then twice, then Julian found himself making excuses to drive south almost every other day. His business partners started asking questions. His assistant looked concerned. But Julian did not care. For the first time in his adult life, he was choosing happiness over profit. Nina never acted surprised when he appeared. She would simply smile, pour his coffee, and pick up their conversation wherever they had left off. Sometimes they talked about deep things, dreams and fears and regrets. Other times they just enjoyed comfortable silence while Julian ate her incredible food and watched her work. He started arriving earlier, staying later. One afternoon when Nina mentioned needing to fix a wobbly table, Julian rolled up his sleeves and did it himself. Another day when her dishwasher broke, he called a repairman from Chicago who owed him a favor and had the machine fixed within hours. Nina tried to pay him, but Julian refused. "Friends help each other," he said simply. "You taught me that." The townspeople started recognizing him. Charlie, the older man who was always in the corner booth, began nodding hello. The young mother with 2 kids learned his name. Even the local police officer who stopped by for afternoon pie started including Julian in their friendly small talk. It felt strange and wonderful to be known as just Julian, not Julian Hayes the billionaire, not the CEO, just a regular person who liked pot roast and good company. One evening, Nina asked him to stay after closing. "I want to show you something," she said mysteriously. She led him into the kitchen, her private domain that customers never saw. It was smaller than he expected, but immaculately organized. Pots and pans hung from hooks, spices lined the shelves in neat rows, and an old recipe box sat on the counter, its edges worn smooth from years of use. "This was my grandmother's," Nina said, touching the box gently. "Every recipe she ever made, written on index cards in her handwriting. This is my treasure, Julian. Not worth anything to anyone else, but to me it is priceless." Julian understood. He had things worth millions that meant nothing. This battered box full of handwritten recipes held more value than his entire art collection. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked softly. Nina met his eyes. "Because I want you to understand something. Real wealth is not in bank accounts. It is in connections, memories, love. You keep talking about your empty penthouse and your lonely life, but Julian, you have the power to change all of that. You just have to be brave enough to choose differently." "What if I am scared?" he admitted, the words coming out raw and honest. "Then you are human," Nina said gently. "But scared and stuck are two different things. You can be scared and still move forward." That night, driving home, Julian made a decision. He called his second-in-command and started delegating responsibilities. He did not need to oversee every deal personally. He did not need to attend every meeting. He had built an empire by working non-stop for 20 years, but what was the point if he never actually lived? Over the next month, Julian restructured his entire life. He hired more executives to handle daily operations. He moved most of his work remote. And he bought a small house in the town near Nina's diner, a cozy cottage with a front porch and a kitchen that actually got used. The day he told Nina, she was decorating cupcakes for a child's birthday party. Her hands stilled when he explained his plans. "You are moving here?" she asked carefully. "Why?" Julian took a breath. "Because every time I leave this town, I feel like I am leaving the best part of myself behind. Because your friendship has shown me what I have been missing. Because I would rather be happy in a small cottage than miserable in a penthouse." "And what about your business?" "Still running it, just differently. Turns out I do not need to be in Chicago every day. Technology is amazing." He paused, gathering courage. "Nina, I need to be honest about something. These past months, coming here, getting to know you, it has been the happiest time of my life. And I think maybe it is more than just friendship, at least for me." Nina set down her piping bag, her expression unreadable. "Julian, you need to be sure about this. I am not part of your world. I am a small-town woman who runs a diner. No fancy parties, no galas, no society pages." "That is exactly what I want," Julian said earnestly. "I have had enough of that world to last a lifetime. I want real conversations and home-cooked meals. I want to know my neighbors. I want to build something that matters, not just make money. And I want to do all of that with you, if you will let me." Nina's eyes glistened. "You really mean this? Every word?" She walked around the counter and took his hands. "I have been falling for you too, you stubborn man. Watching you transform from this uptight businessman into someone who laughs freely and helps wash dishes, it has been beautiful. But I needed to know you were choosing this life because you wanted it, not because you were running away." "I am running toward something," Julian corrected. "Toward happiness, toward authenticity, toward you." Their first kiss tasted like frosting and coffee and promise. Outside, the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, making everything glow golden. Somewhere in the dining room, the old clock chimed 3. Life went on around them, simple and sweet and real. The months that followed were not always easy. Julian's old colleagues thought he had lost his mind. His mother worried he was throwing away his future. But Nina stood beside him through all of it, steady and sure. She taught him to cook, really cook, not just heat things up. They made pot roast together using her grandmother's recipe, and when Julian tasted it, made by his own hands, he felt prouder than closing any business deal. He started spending mornings at the diner, helping prep food and chatting with regulars. His afternoons went to running his business remotely, which turned out to work perfectly fine without him being physically present in an office. Evenings belonged to Nina, to walks through town, to sitting on his porch watching fireflies, to conversations that lasted until midnight. 1 year later, standing in Nina's kitchen on a quiet Sunday morning, Julian watched her make pancakes while humming to herself. Sunlight poured through the window. Coffee percolated on the stove. Everything smelled like vanilla and home. Happy? Nina asked, catching him staring. Julian pulled her close, not caring about the flour that transferred to his shirt. Happier than I ever imagined possible. She kissed him softly. Good. Because you are stuck with me now. Best thing that ever happened to me, he murmured against her hair. And it was true. Julian still had his wealth, still ran his company, still appeared on those Forbes lists. But now he also had lazy Sunday mornings and homemade pancakes. He had a community that knew his name. He had a woman who loved him for who he was, not what he owned. He had found what money could never buy, a life filled with genuine connection, simple joys, and the kind of happiness that came from feeding souls instead of just ambitions. Looking back, Julian could pinpoint the exact moment everything changed. A random detour, a weathered sign, a smile from a woman who cooked with her whole heart. That single choice to stop at a small diner had led him here, to this kitchen, this life, this love. He had been a billionaire empty inside, chasing success that never satisfied. Now he was just Julian, a man who finally understood that the richest life had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with finding someone whose smile made the whole world brighter, whose cooking fed not just his body but his soul, and whose love taught him that happiness was never about having everything, but about cherishing the right things.